couple things. One, we have finally a budget deal that was passed, $1.2 trillion funding bill. This is why it's hard to pay attention to any sort of shutdown fears. And also, the one I'm interested in is sort of loans being doled out to greenify certain industries. We'll get to that. I made up greenify.
I'm sure we will.
I'm great at it, but I think that's an okay term. Nathan, okay, were you surprised by the funding bill? Anything attached to this we should know about?
No, absolutely. It wasn't surprised one bit. I mean, obviously, this was not the time that we were going to see a shutdown after, we've seen the March 8th package pass. And now with this one, this actually goes to September 30th. Obviously, Congress has fiscal year 2025 that they need to start working on. But it takes away the scary April 30th date of the sequester. If Congress was still operating under a CR at that point, we're going to have a 1% cut. So if you're in the defense contractor space, you can breathe easy. In terms of just other funding aspect, this was really just more of just keep the government open. This wasn't really one of those government funding bills you see a lot of policy writers attached. I think that could potentially come back again in September. We won't see a shutdown then right before the election. I think the shutdown talk is done for the rest of 2024. But now the question goes, okay, what's going to come next? Ukraine aid, other types of legislation, and so forth. Still a lot of work needs to be done before the elections.
All right, so let's get a to-do list out going here. Nathan, what's on the top of your to-do list if you were Congress?
Well, obviously, the most important thing is Ukraine. Ukraine and Israeli aid. And now this is where a part of politics is going to come into play. So Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene issued a motion to vacate right before the vote to keep the government open. Now, this motion wasn't set in stone. She reserves the right to implement this when she sees fit. Now, the question is this going to happen during the time that Speaker Johnson moves forward with Ukraine aid? He said last week, that he plans to offer a Ukraine idea, if you will. Now, what that aid looks like, still to be up for a discussion. But if this motion to vacate comes through, then they're going to have essentially a vote to decide whether or not Speaker Johnson keeps his job. Now, we've seen comments from Democrats over the past week or so, a couple of New York Democrats, for example, that said that they'd be willing to offer the speaker, but that comes with a price tag. And the question is, what is that price tag? Now, if that motion to vacate succeeds, everything stops. You can't do any work in the House whatsoever, and we go back to the game of watching C-SPAN where they try and elect a new speaker. Now, if the motion to vacate fails, and I'm not saying it's going to come, but if it does come and it fails, then we can move to Ukraine aid. Then we can move to things like Representative Patrick McHenry of the House Financial Services Committee wants to move on crypto legislation. And then we can do other things like FAA reauthorization, keep the planes, going and so forth like that. All things that have to be done before Congress says, I'm good. I'm just going to pay attention to the election now.
Okay, you watch C-SPAN. We're not going to watch C-SPAN. That's why we go to you. That's the whole point. Okay, let's go to greenification because I made up the word and I want to talk about it. So basically you have companies like Century Aluminum, Cleveland Cliffs, for example, getting sizable loans right now, like $500 million plus worth of loans. Overall, we're looking at $6 billion was doled out today. What is this for? Is this a good use of money? What's the rhetoric down there in D.C.?
Well, so I think there's really two trains of thought here. You have the political calculus and you also have the market calculus. Now, my energy colleagues will say that no matter what happens in Washington, the market calculus says that green energy and solar and wind and so forth right here is a good investment. And so you have a lot of these companies that are going out there and saying, look, we think that we can move forward with this because no matter what Washington does, we think it will be a good return on investment. But from the political calculus, you have the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, this was a whole bunch of carrots and tax incentives, over $500 billion in new spending that is boosting a lot of these EVs and a lot of these green energy companies. The question here is, what happens if President Trump wins in November? Now, I think there's two scenarios. One right now, because the Republicans are not in power, you see a lot of statements saying that we're going to repeal the entire thing in its entire, all these tax credits and so forth like that. But if they become the party that's in power, it's a little bit more difficult to do when there's a lot of red states out there that are getting getting the benefit of these, green tax incentives. A lot of new plants are being built and so forth. So I think in terms of the political calculus, if President Trump wins, tweaks may be on store, or certain tax cuts and certain tax incentives may be in trouble. But ultimately, my energy colleagues love to tell me that no matter what happens in Washington, the green energy wave is still coming.
Oh, I hear that all the time, Nathan. You are not alone, my friend. What's interesting is I was in CERAWeek last week, which is the big energy conference, and Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm was there. And the message sort of 2 years in a row was, guys, we have money for you. come get it. Which I don't know if that's what you really want to hear if you're worried about fiscal deficits, but that was the idea. They have to put out these loans in a time frame. So like if you want them, you got to get them. And I've been talking to other people as well who say there's not enough projects. Like we're definitely going to spend money in areas where we shouldn't because we're just not. The time frame isn't really working in the same way. It's like cut a check, go for it.
So they're going to build a bridge to nowhere type thing for energy.
They'll build bridges. Some might go somewhere and some might go to nowhere. But should that be the case? Or should you put some of those bridges and like you give it a little bit more time and see if something else can come up? But anyway, I'm into it.
Hey, Nathan, just what we're seeing in Congress with Mr. Johnson trying to, in order to get the House in order, the House majority, he's working with the Democrats. And I know Marjorie Taylor Greene has put out a suggestion that maybe it's time for him to be removed from power. But it seems like that's the only way to get anything done these days. Can he survive?
I think it's a big question, but the answer is that he's been doing a lot of what we've seen other Republican speakers do over the last few years. It's one thing to say that you're going to try and stop, legislation from appearing and so forth like that. It's another thing to actually do it when you're in power. And so what we've seen is Speaker Johnson has said, look, I want to try and keep my options open. And remember, things in Washington don't get done until the last exact second before something bad happens. And so it's always keep the options open, keep it flexible. But ultimately, Speaker Johnson has kept things in the ball rolling. And so I think what we'll see over the next few weeks is you may see a motion to vacate. You may see Speaker Johnson be vacated. But then the question is, who else do they have on the bench? They've gone through so many different individuals, Representative Tom Emmer, Patrick McHenry, and so like I'm not exactly sure what would happen in terms of another motion to vacate. But if the Democrats, it only needs to be about 4 or 5. If those 4 or 5 Democrats come out and say that we're willing to help you for a price, this could be over and we could just, be back to seeing Congress do legislation.
Man, Nathan, I don't remember your job. I say that every single time that you come on. Nathan Dean, Bloomberg
He
Intelligence.
likes this stuff, though.
He does, I know. He's a U.S.
weird
policy
guys.
senior analyst,
I know,
and you know
he's
what?
good.
He digs it.
He digs
But
it.
that's what I love about it. It's like he's engaged. He's
Yep.
really into it. That's what a lot of our Bloomberg Intelligence guys bring to the whole situation. And then we have